Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. Together, we are the Bills guys. This is the Air Raid Hour presented by the Cover One Sports Network. And Justice always coming in. We appreciate it. I'm trying not to swear as much anymore, so I'm just going to say the Air Raid Hour bleep and bleeps, and I'll let you all who are maybe listening in podcast form figure out what Justin just put up onto the screen there. But yeah, I save the swearing for like the last 15 minutes. Like that was my new
dark.
But for those of you who might notice something a little different on the screen, no, Kendall's not here today. It's not a technical issue today. He will not be joining us 45 minutes into the show. He is taking a well-deserved little break today. So it's just Dave and myself kicking it old school here, as going to be breaking down, sort of previewing the offense for the Buffalo Bills. In February, we did two shows, one where we sort of deconstructed the roster. Hey, what's left on offense after, all the UFAs and everything had cleared out? What's left on defense after all the UFAs and things like that have cleared out? Now it's our chance to assess how the Buffalo Bills have reconstructed the roster. And we're going to go through the depth chart on offense today. And then we're going to go through the depth chart on defense on Monday and sort of break down position by position everything the Buffalo Bills have done this offseason and what we expect from training camp battles to seasonal expectations and things of that nature. So we're starting today on the offense. And I'll this. I kind of want to call my shot early on this show today, Dave. I want to call my shot early.
Okay.
I was going through the depth chart, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. I'm going through the depth chart on offense, and I'm just thinking to myself, a couple of years ago, heading into the 2020 season, I made a prediction that Josh Allen would score 40 touchdowns, combined 40 touchdowns. And a lot of people were like, you're being ridiculous. That's too big. Below your expectations. I called my shot anyway, 40 touchdowns for Josh Allen. What did he do that season, 2020? He combined for 46 touchdowns. I think he even caught one that year. Last season, he went down a little bit. He had 42 touchdowns. But looking at this offense, man, and even looking at like the coaching staff, bringing in Mike Shula as a sounding board to Ken Dorsey, Joe Brady, some of these new additions, Aaron Cromer, etc. I think it's time to set the bar this season for Josh Allen at touchdowns at 50. Like, I want to set the bar for Josh Allen this season at 50 touchdowns. If you do the math, that is 3 touchdowns a game, 17 games, 3 touchdowns. That's 51 touchdowns. Some people might say like, oh, that's unrealistic, right? Like, that's not how the NFL works. This isn't a video game, but we do the pregame show here at Cover One. And I feel like every single week when we do this pregame show, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a conversation, and we're going to expect at least 3 touchdowns from Josh Allen every single time we preview these games. And the Buffalo Bills are going to have better competition in 2022. And a lot of people are going to say to themselves, well, better competition, better defenses, we should expect the numbers for Josh Allen to come down. But I honestly, the reverse of that, some might say it hurts, but the defense isn't going to be as good probably in 2022 as it was in 2021. And for that reason, Josh Allen and the offense are going to have to keep their foot on the gas a little bit more than they did. So I want to call my shot early here. I know it's only, May, but I'm setting the bar at 50 touchdowns for Josh Allen this year.
I mean, if Josh Allen, it's funny because like 2 seasons in a row, he's had individually, in a vacuum MVP caliber seasons, right? And there just happened to be another player that just kind of, squeaked by him, if you want to call it that, with Aaron Rodgers and what have you. But the Bills offense, and we've said this, I know I've made this point many times, that the offense in the NFL today, a top end offense is, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it's easier to sustain than a top end defense. So I agree with you when you say the defense might not be as good. I mean, the Bills were the number 1 defense in the NFL last year statistically. I do think that it's going to be hard for them to repeat that, not because I don't think they're going to be a great defense, but I just think you look at the history of number one defenses or elite defenses, it's just really hard to kind of stay on top. Like they could still very well be a top 5 defense, and they
Mhm.
might be number one. But the chances of the Bills offense still being a number 1 or number 3 or top 5 is really that's where I'm banking my money,
Mhm.
right? Like if I was going to pick one or the other, I would say the Bills offense is more likely to be humming again in 2022. And the fact of the matter is like it's going to be tougher competition.
Mhm.
There may be more that Josh Allen even has to do than he did in the last 2 years, and that's the crazy thing about this is that like there's still some potential incremental room for him to elevate even further statistically because we're going to get into it tonight talking about all these positions, like what's around him. Um, but I do think a lot of what might go into whether or not he can get that 50 touchdowns that you talk about is what's that dynamic going to be like between him and first year offensive coordinator
Mhm.
Ken Dorsey, right? To me, that is going to be a huge factor in Josh Allen, continuing his elite level of play. Not necessarily because he's not going to continue to be elite, but like the system he's in and the offense around him, what is that going to look like? And is that going to hinder them early in the season, or they're going to take some getting
Mhm.
used to, or are they going to come out of the gates flying? So it's not anything about Josh Allen. It's about Ken Dorsey and like what situations is he going to put this offense in? Is he going to keep them humming? To me, that is one of the sort of factors we talked about, obviously, when Ken Dorsey was put in the position, but maybe something since the draft and our
Mhm.
draft prep that like we haven't talked about as much lately. And it'll be a very interesting topic this summer, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, during training camp, I think that's going to be one of the number one things is, hey, how's the offense looking at practice? Once we get into the preseason game, what's the offense looking like in the preseason game? Even though you don't show everything in the preseason, if they struggle a little bit, we're definitely going to overreact. But what position battles off the top of your head stick out as maybe the most intriguing, right? Iron sharpens iron. There's going to be competition for
Mhm.
roster spots this summer. It's going to be the cut down day is going to be painful again. There are
Yep.
some players that are on the Buffalo Bills roster right now that will probably be contributors on other teams' rosters come September,
Yep.
just because that's the way it works when you have a really good football team. But what are some position battles off the top of your head that stick out to you the most?
Man, some of these feel like Groundhog Day, to be honest with you, because I feel like we talked about some of these same ones last year, and we didn't really get a ton of clarity on it either throughout the season or maybe really what the clue is
Mm,
in coming this offseason. So one of the top one of the top things has to be that kick and punt return um, battle, right? Whoever ends up battling within that, is that going to be Khalil Shakir? Is Isaiah McKenzie going to be back in the mix
mhm,
again for that this year? Is Marquez Stevenson going to be in the mix again for that this year? I still think it's unsettled, right? And the Bills kind of were forced into a corner last year in the playoffs or at the end of the season, just putting Micah Hyde back there to catch punts. But you need to have some stability at that. And, we were spoiled 2 years ago with Andre Roberts, who could do both. Now we're going to go into the summer with a lot of guys throwing their hat into the ring, if you will, with Marcus Stevenson still kind of a young player who's had experience, doing kick returns in some punt last year, mostly a kick returner in college, still 1 year removed. Isaiah McKenzie, who we know has had some ball security issues and but does have experience. And then the newcomer, right? Khalil Shakir, who's got that
mhm,
experience in college, who I think is a player for that spot. So to me, that is again an unsettled competition, just like it was going into the summer last year. So that's one.
mhm,
Uh, Number two is probably going to be for me like what happens. What happens in this running back room, right? Like a lot of people were ready to write Zach Moss off after the draft. We got James Cook, we signed Duke Johnson, but like to me, you've got now a very interesting mix of running backs, a different mix than what you've had in years past, right? Last year it was Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, Matt Breida, right? Like there were some hopes for Matt Breida, but I don't think there was anyone thinking he'd come in and be like some kind of bell cow. This year is going to be really
mhm,
interesting. Is it too early to write off Zach Moss? We saw the picture you posted on our Twitter about him, of him being just completely yoked Like, and
Out of his
Devin
mind.
Singletary's
Yeah.
finished the season, right? And now you drop
Mhm.
James Cook, a different type of running back, uh, something we haven't had in the backfield before, and you still have Duke Johnson on the roster, who maybe was an insurance plan, but maybe not. Like, would he potentially still make the team in some form or fashion? I don't think so right now, but
Mhm.
going to be interesting to see. Like, can Devin Singletary still hang on to that RB1 job? Is Zach Moss going to come back with a vengeance this year? What does James Cook's role look like? So that competition, if you want to call it a competition at running back,
Mhm.
is going to be super interesting. And then probably number 3 for me right now is going to be, okay, like, we've drafted Kaiir Elam. Trey White's coming back from injury. Like, how are the reps going to look at that cornerback position come the summer, right? Come training. Is there still a free agent out there that the Bills maybe
Mhm.
like entertain as a possible option? Do they feel confident enough in Trey White to be back for the season opener that they're not going to go out and add anyone else? Is Kaiir Elam going to come in day one and be like the de facto CB1 while Trey White's out? Probably yes, right? Because you drafted him in the first round. But like, what's the role for Dane Jackson going to be? What are the futures going to hold for guys like Nick McLeod, Elijah Griffin, and now Christian Benford, who they went out and signed or went out and drafted, right? So cornerback depth to me is really interesting. The spots behind Kaiir Elam and Trey White become
Mhm.
very interesting to me. And Trey White's injury playing a factor in potentially who then makes the team or who doesn't. So those 3 are probably the top of mind. You know, the offensive line is probably close there as an honorable mention, right? What's going to happen with the depth on the offensive line? It seems like the starting 5 is set, but the depth on the offensive line is not. So that's clearly an honorable mention and an important honorable mention for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, looking at all the different position battles, this offseason, like how does the running back room shake out? The back half of the wide receiver room, the kick and punt return competition, the offensive line depth, the defensive line rotations, the third
Right.
linebacker, and even the third linebacker depth and the secondary depth, whether it be corner or safety. I think one of the patterns that you notice when you sort of look at these training camp battles, the things that we're going to be looking for this summer, a lot of it concerns the depth of the roster. So I think one of the things that we could be seeing or could be in for is sort of a churning of the back half of the roster, and competition brings out the best. And the Buffalo Bills are bringing competition for the back half of their roster. And when the back half of their roster goes up against the starters in training camp, they're going to make them even better. It's just going to be a highly competitive training camp for the
Yes.
Buffalo Bills this year. And I think that's going to make them the best team possible. So really looking forward to all the various different training camp battles. And we're going to be hashing this out 10 times over come July. Can't wait to get these guys back at St. John Fisher. Let's start today in the quarterback room. A lot of
Mhm.
turnover at
Yeah.
this position in the offseason. So the new quarterback room is obviously Josh Allen, QB1. There's no one questioning that. Case Keenum enters as the new backup. Matt Barkley returns, and there is no fourth quarterback. Ken Dorsey's in as the offensive coordinator. Joe Brady's the quarterback coach. Mike Shula enters the equation as sort of an offensive consultant. And you have even Aaron Cromer, I think, who's going to play a little bit of a role in what we do offensively, and that's going to affect the quarterback as well. So my first question really tonight, as we start to dig into the depth chart, is this. Obviously, we don't have to sit here and is it going to be Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett? We don't have to worry about that kind of shit. Oh, I swore. Oops. We don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But what effect is the turnover going to have on the quarterback room this year?
Um, Not much, I don't think, to be honest. Like, I think having Matt Barkley back in the mix brings some familiarity, a sounding board for Josh Allen, a guy that he can run things past. But like, ultimately, those guys are there to support Josh, right? And Case Keenum comes in, veteran, fills that sort of Mitch Trubisky role from a year ago, a guy that you feel like can come in and at least be serviceable in a case that Josh is out for a short term for whatever reason. The Bills obviously felt that was important to address when they made the trade for him. So I like what they've done with the QB room, because to be honest, like, what was it, like a month ago, or like maybe a little more than a month ago, in early mid-March, we were talking about how Josh Allen was the only quarterback on the roster at that time. So
Mhm.
the Bills really did a nice job in kind of rounding out the room. Matt Barkley maybe kind of plays that Davis Webb role from a year ago, where he's kind of that guy who's been in the system, another sort of like quote coach, coach on the field.
Yeah.
Um, we didn't necessarily hear a ton about like Matt Barkley kind of like coaching up guys or doing that type of thing necessarily as much as we heard about it from Davis Webb. But I think Matt Barkley, knowing this is the twilight of his career, he's really been a perennial backup his entire career in the NFL. It's a chance for him to go on a run with this Super Bowl caliber team. And I think that's going to excite him. I think that's going to invigorate him. And I think that's going to put, motivation into Matt Barkley to do the best he can to help this team any way he can. And that's something that I think, like, based on the relationship he has with Josh Allen, should be expected. And then Case Keenum, obviously, like I said, filling that Mitch Trubisky role. I think that very, very good, serviceable backup. So I kind of like what the Bills have in the QB room right now. I don't think it's a drop off necessarily from last year at all.
Yeah, we got a couple people coming in. Number one, we had a comment from Pops Mafia, and he said, you worried about too many cooks in the kitchen. I think that is a significant concern with Ken Dorsey calling plays for the first time. Joe Brady, a guy who used to call plays, having to sort of take a step back, humble himself, and become a quarterback's coach. If you really look at Joe Brady's resume, he hasn't really had too many positions of power outside of being the co-offensive coordinator at LSU and then the offensive coordinator there at Carolina. And then you sort of have Grandpa Mike Shula in there sort of. I feel like Mike Shula, I think people might be overthinking this a little bit. He's just a sounding board. So there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of the offensive philosophy is going to funnel through Ken Dorsey and Aaron Kromer. I think those are going to be the two major decision makers in the room. Ken Dorsey, obviously the play caller, and I think Aaron Kromer is going to dictate a lot of what's in front of the quarterback, and that obviously dictates the rest of the play call. But I think Dorsey and Kromer are going to be the two guys who sort of facilitate this offense. Joe Brady's going to be there to maybe add a wrinkle or two and coach the quarterbacks. And I think Mike Shula is mostly just going to be a sounding board, a guy who's been there, done that, called a ton of plays in this league. There was that situation at LSU when Joe Brady called plays. I'm blanking on the name of the offensive coordinator there at LSU, but he was literally sitting right next to him in the box the whole time. And Joe Brady, a young play caller, was calling plays, but he had a senior former NFL coach and college football offensive coordinator there in the press box sitting next to him, that it was just a sounding board for him the entire time. Like, hey, what are you seeing? Should I do this here? Should I do that? I think Mike Shula might end up next to Ken Dorsey in the box for the Buffalo Bills this year. This past season, Brian Daboll had Ryan Wendell next to him. I think it's going to be a little bit different this year. I think a guy like Ken Dorsey is going to have Mike Shula next to him, but that's why
do we know if Dorsey said if he's going to be in the box or on the field?
He has actually not said that. I'm assuming he's going to be in the box. I know he was down on the field with Josh Allen. I prefer my offensive coordinator in the box, though. I prefer them up top. I've always been a big fan. I think with Joe Brady, you have a guy who can maybe relay some things on the field and things like that. So I just assume he's in the box. I hope he's in the box. I prefer he's up in the box. But yeah, you're right. I don't actually know where he's going to be. So maybe he'll be down on the sidelines and he'll have Mike Shula in his earpiece from the box helping him as a sounding board. So that could be another situation there. But Matt Barkley, I think, was a low key offseason addition, because I think his friendship with Josh Allen, he brings a little bit of familiarity, a little comfort for Josh Allen. There's so many different changes this year, so many different coaches. I think having a friend there in Matt Barkley, someone he's super close with, is going to be huge for Josh Allen. But I look at the depth chart and I look at this team in general. 53 guys make the team. I don't know if you can afford really to keep three quarterbacks in this day and age. So you're going to have Josh Allen, you're going to have Case Keenum. Where does that leave Matt Barkley? What are your thoughts on how the quarterback room is going to maybe shape up on an early 53-man prediction?
I personally believe that Barkley should not be on the 53-man roster. That's just preference. That roster spot is more valuable for someone else. Again, Matt Barkley was on the street. He's not really got he's not going to really probably have a lot of options at this point in his career. I think put him on the practice squad, let him still be along for the ride, let him be that guy who can still be around the team all the time. And in an emergency, if you need to bring him up, you bring him up. But for me, it makes way more sense for a guy like Barkley to be on the practice squad. I don't think there's any worry of him going somewhere else. And I think you just roster two QBs on the 53. That would be my early prediction. It would just be Josh and Keenum.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the practice squad rules shake out this year. Chances are it's probably going to go back to a more traditional practice squad setting, but I think even in the new CBA, they worked it out so it's going to be 14 on the practice squad, and you're still going to be able to have up to 4 veterans. So Matt Barkley would obviously fall into that veteran category. But with the new rules, which I kind of like in the NFL, some of these relaxed practice squad rules, if I had it my way, there'd be, 75 players on every team, and you could house a pretty decent practice squad. But I don't get to make the rules. But you mentioned that you don't have to worry about losing Matt Barkley. Injuries happen at quarterback this season. We saw Matt Barkley rotate between like 3, 4, 5 teams last season. And I think that teams will come calling for Matt Barkley. The difference is like, I go through Matt Barkley's social media and, I see him on Twitter and all these different things. He seems like a guy who is just looking for a little bit of stability. He's got a family. I think he's starting a Bitcoin podcast. Like the guy I think is looking for just a little bit of stability in his life. So even if other teams do come calling, it doesn't mean he has to sign the contract with them. So he could easily just be the Buffalo Bills' third quarterback on the practice squad. And the Bills really don't have to worry about him going somewhere else. He's just like, listen, guys, unless I have a chance to start somewhere, I don't want to live out of a suitcase. I'll be your third quarterback. I'll take the practice squad salary. I'll finish out the last couple of years of my career here as that sort of dude. So yeah, I do think he plays that Davis Webb role. And I think his relationship with Josh Allen helps that. He does have a Bitcoin pasta. Is with Deshaun Kaiser of all people, by the way, too, the former Notre Dame quarterback. So if anyone, I don't know. I saw one episode. If they produced a second or a third or a fourth, if you're into that crypto stuff, check out Matt Barkley's crypto podcast. Someone mentioned Akil Glass earlier in the comment section. What are your thoughts on bringing in a camp arm? I was really upset that Akil Glass, of all these freaking noodle arm quarterbacks that are getting, undrafted free agent deals, Akil Glass, our guy from, the HBCU, didn't get all he got was a training camp invite from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was a little disappointed in that. What are your thoughts on the possibilities of the Bills bringing in? It'll be interesting to see because they have rookie camp coming up soon. What noodle arm quarterbacks they bring in to be the camp, the rookie camp arms, and then maybe if they sign one, they still got 5 open roster spots. Maybe they sign one of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, although it's just like one of those things where it's like, are the Bills really at this point in need of like trying to develop a young guy? Like, it doesn't seem like that's like their path of interest. It seems like they've got Josh Allen, they're set with their starter for the sake of the franchise and for the sake of, stability. Should Josh go down for any sort of short period of time, I think they're pretty much set on just having that, steady veteran as the backup. And then the third guy is really just kind of either like a Davis Webb or Matt Barkley type. The fourth, if there's a fourth guy, it's purely just going to be to like, I don't know, like get a look at a guy that could take reps or get a guy that maybe they think could be a practice squad quarterback down the road. But it seems like that's not like at the top of their priority list right now. So I mean, I'm not against it by any means. Like, I'm not sitting here saying they shouldn't do it, but I just feel like with all the other priorities they have, it just seems like that's probably not near the top of the list.
Yeah, by chance came in and said, why do I feel like the Patriots are going to turn DR King? I didn't even realize DR King went to the Patriots. That's a good get for them. He's very versatile, kick, punt, return, wide receiver, quarterback, obviously from University of Miami. He had those Manny Diaz connections. The Bills were really showing some interest in DR King in Indianapolis. So that's interesting that didn't shake out. Pops Mafia says bring in that University of Buffalo guy they had before. He's actually a tight end for the Philadelphia Eagles now, so that's not a possibility. Cardell Jones, former XFL star, and Cardell Jones is available. But I think you're right too, and I think another thing is in the preseason, do you want to see some like camp arm, a guy who's going to be playing in the USFL a year from now? Do you want to see that guy out there in the fourth quarter of the preseason when you're trying to evaluate Isaiah Hodgins and Marquez Stevenson, or do you want an NFL quarterback and a guy like Matt Barkley throwing those footballs? So I think that as much as like it's exciting to have a new quarterback in the room, like a younger big arm quarterback, like an Akil Glass in the room, I think that Matt Barkley's just fine. And I was a little thrown off by this comment in our comment section, butt naked man coming in saying I'm naked underneath. So you got me there. That one threw off. Jason then says, why not bring in Fitzpatrick? Well, because we got Case Keenum. So I don't think we need a guy. like Ryan Fitzpatrick. All right. So transitioning now from quarterbacks, one final thought on the quarterback room. Josh Allen spending his offseason working on ball placement. The Buffalo Bills did not have great yards after catch in the 2022 season. So he's working on ball placement. And I think that's a perfect transition to our next segment, because our next segment is running backs. And we're going to be talking about running backs here in the running back room. This was something you mentioned at the top of the show as something the Buffalo Bills and we as Bills fans are really going to be keeping an eye out for this offseason. You have coming into training camp, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. You have James Cook, who was drafted in the second round, Duke Johnson, who signed that 1-year deal, Tywan Jones, who's really just a gunner, and Raheem Blackshear, the sort of scat back out of Virginia Tech, called himself Debo Samuel-like in an interview this week that made it to its way all the way to Pro Football Talk. The headline was a little misleading. He pretty much just said, hey, I can play slot receiver or I can, be a running back, is pretty much all he said. But the point being, looking at this running back room, Devin Singletary and Zach Moss are the only true 3 down backs that are on this football team right now. James Cook is sort of like that JD McKissic, at least for now, type of receiving back. Duke Johnson falls into that same mold. Tywan Jones isn't really a running back at all. And then Raheem Blackshear, I just mentioned, he's sort of a scat back. It seems like the scales of the running back room are tipping in the favor of sort of scat backs. What are your thoughts on that?
I can't tell if it's tipping in the favor of scat backs or they just want they want a more diverse room, right? I mean, I think they tried to go that route with a guy like Matt Breida last year to bring a little different element. It just really didn't work out. So Chris says at this point, I'm dealing with it. Yeah. But it is interesting. I think that mixing up the skill sets is probably the goal here, trying to see what combination of 2 to 3 guys really gives them the best multiplicity, as Kendall would like to say, right? Being multiple on offense. And I think based on the fact that they went hard after JD McKissic in free agency, didn't get him, went to their contingency plan in Duke Johnson, and then drafted James Cook, it's clear that they had visions in their mind of utilizing a back of that nature, right? So not something they've really had in the past. And I think they probably tried to do that with Matt Breida last year, and it didn't really work out. He didn't necessarily either have the skill, the skill set they really needed, or maybe he just, was a little bit past, what he had shown in his prior stints, like with the Niners and things like that. So for me, I don't know that they're going towards that. I think it's maybe they're just trying to balance out the room a bit. And I think that it's clear whether or not you think Breece Hall was on the radar or not. It's kind of a moot point now. They wanted a guy that they wanted to invest in guys that could be good receivers, right? Whether it's JD McKissic, Duke Johnson, James Cook, all 3 of these guys have in common excellent receiving backs. And while Zach Moss and Devin Singletary have shown the ability that they can be good receiving backs, they're not, neither of them are in the same realm as these other 3. So I think it's more of a balancing act than anything.
Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on there, because it seems like the competition in training camp is going to be Devin Singletary versus Zach Moss, and then it's going to be James Cook versus Duke Johnson. I don't think it's going to be Devin Singletary versus James Cook. I don't think that's the type of situation we're going to see. I really do think it's going to be Moss versus Singletary for the first, second down role, and it's going to be James Cook versus Duke Johnson for the third down role. And I think we can all picture in our head who we think is going to win each of those competitions. I think but you saw last year in the Kansas City game, which is this whole move to the scat back thing. It makes sense, but it also sort of we talked all off season about taking some of the pressure off of Josh Allen, right? And we talked about 12 personnel, and we were maybe concerned that we were going to become too much of a running offense. To me, that concern is gone now with the way that we drafted the running back position and some of the guys that we signed. Like we saw in the Kansas City game, the Bills not want to rely on Josh Allen in short yardage situations, much to our yelling at the TV screen when Devin Singletary couldn't pick up that first down and Isaiah McKenzie couldn't pick up that first down in those short yardage situations. Bills didn't do anything to sort of add a power type of back to take the pressure off of Josh Allen in those type of situations. 3rd and 1, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, there's no running back on this offense that's taking the pressure off of Josh Allen in those types of situations. So while they did add O.J. Howard and they've added Jalen Weidermeyer, and you think whoa, more 12 personnel, it almost seems like 12 personnel is not going to be something that dominates the Bills offense, but it's going to be a wrinkle, an addition to the offense, something they can throw out there. And you're going to see a lot of those things like Kendall mentioned, like James Cook could be in there with 12 personnel with OJ Howard, Dawson Knox. And then the next thing you know, all 5 of them are wide receivers. So as much as it looks like on paper, the Bills could be putting more of an emphasis on the running game with all these things, plus the addition of Aaron Kromer, I don't think we have too much to worry about the ball coming out of Josh Allen's hands, at least with the way the running back room is shaped up, because I just don't picture any of these guys, even James Cook, being a guy who you're going to want to take the ball out of Josh Allen's hands in pressure situations. Now, the ball might end up in one of their hands, aka James Cook, but it's not the kind of guy who's going to take that ball out of Josh Allen's hands. Looking at it, Ken Dorsey, obviously the OC now. You got Kelly Skipper returning as running backs coach. Aaron Kromer is the new offensive line coach, as I just mentioned a second ago. It looks like this running back room and this running game is going to be switching back to more of a zone scheme. Mm-hmm. You saw Eric Wood on his, on Twitter. He mentioned that, hey, the Buffalo Bills, their running back room, he runs zone is his base. Like that's his go-to. He's a zone guy, but he also does that gap stuff. He also does that pulling stuff. He's got those things in his bag of tricks. So even though his base is going to be zone, you're still going to see that pin and pull and all those different things from Aaron Kromer. But what effect do you think Aaron Kromer has on this running back competition?
On the competition, well, I would say it doesn't really bode well for a guy like Zach Moss, who didn't really show great vision last year. I think what it really tells you is obviously the one cut and go, or the wide zone, or the ability to have vision and have vision be one of your sort of primary assets in the run game. I still think that bodes well for a guy like Devin Singletary, because it seems like, the scouting reports on James Cook, one of the things that he, was lacking was vision, right? He's great in space and he's great when he gets the ball in his hands, but as a runner, vision was not necessarily his strong suit. Zach Moss was running into his own guys a bunch last year, running into his own linemen. So Devin Singletary still, to me, when Aaron Kromer comes into the building, it bodes well for a guy like that. Now, I do think that a guy like Aaron Kromer is a perfect type of coach to have for your offensive line, to help even tangentially to a guy like James Cook, because maybe the coaching that James Cook needs, where he needs to maybe improve his vision, and this is something that could be coached. Aaron Kromer is a good fit for that, because then all of a sudden you can kind of understand, okay, here's something I haven't thought of before if I'm James Cook, or here's a new way to approach how I'm attacking the line of scrimmage if I'm James Cook. So there's potential there for improvement, I think, on some of these flaws that Cook has. But I would say from a competition standpoint, it probably is a good thing for Devin Singletary. I don't know if it's a good thing for Zach Moss, unless he's really kind of the injury really affected his vision. I can't imagine that it did. That doesn't really seem to add up. And a guy like James Cook, who's coming in as a rookie, one of the things that he needs to prove on, but it still fits his size and style more than a man gap type of scheme, I think. So James Cook, as a fit into a zone scheme, I think it fits him better. Just want to really quickly touch on a question Claude had a second ago, and he said, if we had missed out on James Cook, do you think that we would have gone after a guy like Rachaad White or Tyler Beatty
100%.
in the draft? And I say yes as well. The Bills were clearly in the market for a running back, right? It was
and a specific kind of running back, someone who's got passing game ability.
Yep. And those two guys would have checked the box. So look, competition is going to be interesting. I still think that your top 3 in the pecking order right now are going to be Singletary, Moss, and Cook. And you can put Cook and Moss in whatever order you want. But I would imagine that entering, who's going to get the first shot at starters reps, it's got to be Devin Singletary.
Yeah, I think coming into training camp, you're going to see Devin Singletary as the first and second down back, and you're going to see James Cook as the starting passing down back. But I think we're writing off Zach Moss a little too quickly here. I think he has a chance to unseat Devin Singletary. People act like Devin Singletary was having such a great year. Like last year, it wasn't until they brought back the pin and pull and the man gap power stuff that Devin Singletary really started to pop off. He was having the same exact problems that Zach Moss was in that zone-based running scheme that the Buffalo Bills were trying to implement. Like he wasn't exactly, breaking the door down at any point early on in the season. So you got to ask yourself the question, was it Devin Singletary? Was it Zach Moss that caused the inability or the ineffective run game early on? Or was it the offensive line? And what exactly can Aaron Cromer fix? I think the Buffalo Bills ended up towards the end of the season leaning on that pin and pull, that man gap power stuff because of their lack of ability, like their lack of belief in the running backs in the room. I think all the smoke around the running backs this offseason is because of maybe their lack of belief in the running backs in the room. But like I said, Cromer's going to come in and he's going to mix things up. He's going to run. I think that his base is going to be zone, but he's going to add in all those wrinkles, that pin and pull, that man gap power stuff. So you're going to see a combination of all of that. And I think that Mike Silver, he was in the room for the entire draft, with Brandon Beane and the Buffalo Bills. And he made the comment in that article for Bally Sports that, he expects Moss to come in and compete with Devin Singletary in 2022 after not having a healthy 2021 offseason, having that ankle surgery. And I mean, if you look at it, Moss has got 2 years left on his contract. Devin Singletary's got 1 year left on his deal. So if Zach Moss comes into camp healthy and he's better, and you can find a role for Zach Moss in this offense, you have 2 years of cost-controlled Zach Moss as opposed to 1 year of cost-controlled Devin Singletary. Now, obviously, you put the best player on the field, duh. But if Moss comes into training camp and he pops off, I think he could easily become RB1 again or RB1A again because he's got that 2 years of cost control. And it will be James Cook playing off Zach Moss as opposed to James Cook playing off Devin Singletary. Am I going to sit here and predict it? No, I think Devin Singletary will win the training camp battle. But I think some of the people in the comment section and some of the people on Twitter who are just unabashedly just ripping on Zach Moss, I think he's gonna prove some people wrong in this training camp, and he's gonna have a solid camp. I think he's gonna have a solid preseason. I think he'll be a contributor on this team in some way, shape, or form or another this year, even if it's just in short yardage, goal line situations. I think Zach Moss is gonna find a role in this football team this year.
I mean, there's definitely a role for him, right? I mean, he is clearly physically the best suited to be the power, whatever version of a power back you want to have, right? Whether it's at the goal line, whether it's in the red zone. And he has shown flashes of the ability to be a decent receiver out of the backfield as well. So it's not like he's limited to just being a grinder, right? Like a thumper between the tackles. Like he has some ability, he has some skills. There is a role for him, right? And if he does come out and he is healthy and he shows well, he should be on there's no way he should be cut, right? That's the extreme. Like he should definitely be in the mix and like getting reps. And I do agree with you. There is a role for him. I'm going to be very interested to see what that role kind of evolves into. Is it going to be the guy that maybe becomes more of an early down back for the Bills rotating series with Devin Singletary, or is he going to be constrained to maybe just goal line situations or things like that? That's going to be really interesting to see, because last year we were saying how okay, maybe there's a few plays for Matt Breida here and there in the offense, and it was really going to be Singletary and Moss. But now you really do, I think, have a 3-headed monster, right? So maybe it is still Singletary and Moss, and maybe you see most of James Cook's action coming as a receiver, right? Or something else. So it's going to be fascinating to see now that they have 3 backs, and we know the Bills from a running back perspective haven't really been a high volume running team. So
and I just feel like if Zach Moss is healthy this year, we loved him coming out in the draft for a reason. Like he was one of our guys for a reason. I think the Buffalo Bills could legitimately have, if Zach Moss is healthy and he can get the ship righted. And someone came in and said, the Bills added no offensive line talent this year. I'm just saying, comes in and says, I'm just saying they drafted no offensive line talent this year. That's because they really believe in Aaron Cromer. And They believe in his coaching. They believe in his scheme. They believe in his philosophy that they can take the players they already have, or they can take, these average guys that get off the streets or aging veterans like Roger Saffold, they get off the streets and they can create a competent offensive line because of what Aaron Kromer brings to the table. So if Aaron Kromer solidifies that offensive line and Zach Moss comes back healthy, you're going to have Devin Singletary, who went on a heater towards the end of last year, Zach Moss, who might live up to the promise of his third-round draft pick potential, and sort of that wild card in James Cook to go along with it. The Bills could have a legitimate I'm not going to say three-headed monster, but three-headed arsenal of weapons at running back, that they can utilize it in different situations. Devin Singletary on first and second down, Zach Moss in short yardage situations, James Cook in the passing game and in third down situations. So I'm really excited. I'm just not willing to, I'm not going to sit here and say like the people who are bashing Zach Moss are wrong to bash Zach Moss. I just think it's the easy thing to do right now. Just like it was the easy thing to do to make fun of, someone mentioned Dawson Knox last year. The only player on the Buffalo Bills roster anyone should be spending any time making fun of is Bobby Hart. And I think we all need to realize he's the only player on this football team worth making fun of right now. But James Cook, there are some people who want to, have the take. Like, I think that he is an every down back. I think he can be an every down back from day one. I don't know how much I buy into that. I think it's going to take years for James Cook to get there, sort of as if he has a chance to become an every down back. This is not Alvin Kamara situation, right? We talked on the last show about some of the, Alvin Kamara workout videos and just his elite contact balance and some of the freakish things that he does. James Cook just isn't. Yes, Matt Hawk as well. I apologize for getting that. James Cook is not Alvin Kamara. He does not have that elite contact balance, but I still think he can be used as a weapon in a ton of ways. Think of a souped up JD McKissick. Eric Turner did a great job over here at Cover One, breaking down James Cook's game throughout the draft process. He's got that shaky vision. He honestly doesn't have that elite of a body type because he is a smaller back. There are things to be concerned about him being an every down running back, but he is just a crazy good space player, and he's crazy versatile with his speed and the other elements of the game. It just honestly makes up for maybe some of the things he's lacks, but I just don't know if I expect him to be an every down running back from day one, despite his lofty draft status. What about you?
No, I don't expect him to be. And it was like at the very, very end of the second round. So it wasn't like they picked him in the top 20 or even really in early in the second round.
Yeah.
Look, and that's fine, right? I think people get hung up on like teams needing to have an every down back that's like toting the ball or being on the field for 20, 25 touches, right? Like the Bills don't really necessarily need that. Now there is something to be said about getting into a rhythm.
We wanted that last year, but that's just because of how bad the room was.
Right. And it's like guys that need that are like guys like Jonathan Taylor, right? Guys that need to get into rhythm. He's toting the rock 20, 25 times a game in a situation where the Colts want to feed him the ball. That's not really what the Bills are, right? John says they wanted McKissick. They went out and got a better version. And I agree with that. Like we most of the people in the comment section probably play fantasy football, right? Like those guys that you pick as running backs that are like the 4 to 5 catch a game guys are more valuable like in fantasy too to your team than the guy who runs the ball 5 times for 20 yards, right? So like there's value in this. I'm talking fantasy there, but in real football sense, there's value to a guy like James Cook, even if he's not a quote every down back. Like he doesn't need to be like James Cook. I like that. He can make he has the potential to do a lot of damage on like I'm not going to say limited volume, but he doesn't need to touch the ball 20 times. He doesn't need to run the ball 15 times. Like get him, get him a few carries here and there. Let him get the ball in space here and there. Like let him be, like you said, a souped up version of J.D. McKissick. I really like that analogy. I think that's exactly what he can be, and he can have a huge impact on this team that way because we haven't really had someone like that. And clearly, the Bills wanted to invest in someone like that. So makes a lot of sense to me.
All right. The last question here at the running back room, then we're going to get to wide receiver is how do you think that the running back room shakes out, sort of like an early 53-man prediction for me, I think the Bills keep 3 running backs on the roster: Singletary, Moss, and James Cook. I think you're going to see a guy like Duke Johnson just lose out to the numbers game. Obviously, Raheem Blackshear doesn't really have a chance to make this roster. And then you look at a guy like Taiwan Jones. A couple people mentioned this in the comment section earlier. Like, the Buffalo Bills drafted 2 linebackers, I think, because they're probably trying to force a guy like Tyler Matakevich off the roster. I think guys like Christian Benford and, adding some DBs who can possibly be gunners on special teams, maybe getting some of your wide receivers who can do that. I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be actively looking to get a guy like Taiwan Jones off the roster this training camp. So can someone like Christian Benford step up and become a quality gunner? Because I would rather have a ninth, defensive back or whatever, 9th or 10th defensive back who can gun and be a backup, DB in case some of our cornerbacks go down, than a 4th running back who, quite frankly, can't do anything. Like, you're never going to play Taiwan Jones on offense. It's break glass in case of emergency. So I'd rather have a guy like Christian Benford who can gun or keep a 7th wide receiver, something of that nature. And I think the Buffalo Bills are going to actively try to get Taiwan Jones off the roster this training camp. But how do you think the running back room shakes out?
Man, that's tough for me to go there yet, right, in May. Like, it's hard for me to go there yet. I love the idea, and I love the thought process behind it. It's logical to me, but I guess the question is like, how much better is Taiwan Jones as a gunner than whatever incremental value you might get from having a 10th defensive back on the roster, right, that probably never sees the field? I think it's like a cost benefit analysis, right? It's like, there's the scales and which side do they tip more heavily. Right now, as it stands, it's probably looking, I would probably lean towards Taiwan Jones is going to be there, but it's not necessarily my preference, right? That's not really my preference from a roster construction standpoint. I don't think it's like valuable from a positional standpoint, but if the Bills feel like from a value standpoint, he is so much better as a gunner than anyone else shows in training camp or in practice, then he might still be on this team. So I do agree with you on the Duke Johnson thing, though. Like, if anything, he's going to be on the practice squad or just outright
A
gone,
veteran,
right?
practice
He
squad
might,
spot. Like,
he could be, if the Bills don't want to use one of their 4 veteran spots on him. I could also see him just being completely off the roster potentially. So it, for me right now, it's like, Singletary, Moss, and Cook, and then TBD whether like Taiwan Jones actually kind of sticks as that 4th guy as a gunner. But I'm with you on the Duke Johnson thing.
Jason then coming to the super chat. Appreciate you, Jason. He says, what if they're going to replace Reggie Gilliam at fullback? Well, they haven't brought in another fullback to compete with him. I threw
like
Reggie Gilliam. I threw in Reggie Gilliam in with the tight end, so we're going to talk about him a little bit again in a little while. But I mean, to me, the only way they would replace Reggie Gilliam is if they phase a fullback out of the offense. Like, hey, we want to keep Jalen Weidemeyer as our 3rd tight end. We don't want to keep that 4th spot as a fullback tight end flex. We don't want to keep a guy like Reggie Gilliam. So I think the only way you see Reggie Gilliam, who plays like all the phases of special teams, is a good lead blocker when they need a lead blocker who can also play tight end. Just his versatility makes him so valuable. I think he makes the football team this year. But if they were to replace him, I think it would be replacing him with a more traditional tight end and just phasing the fullback out completely. I think that's how you're going to see a guy like Reggie Gilliam off the roster. So that leads us to wide receiver now. And a couple people were talking about kick punt returner. So we'll throw kick punt returner into the equation when we talk about wide receivers too, because that's practically where all the kick and punt returners are here. So you look at the Buffalo Bills wide receiver room. The big 4 heading into training camp are Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Jamison Crowder, and Isaiah McKenzie. Some people might argue that a part of that conversation should be Khalil Shakir, but at the end of the day, he still was a 5th rounder. He's got to earn his place. You got Khalil Shakir coming in, Jake Kumaro, Marcus Stevenson, Isaiah Hodgins, sort of all make up that 2nd tier of wide receivers on the Buffalo Bills. And then you have your 3rd tier, guys like Tanner Gentry, guys like Neil Pau'u, and Malik Williams from App State, the UDFAs. Looking at the wide receiver room, David, the big question is essentially like, how does it shake out? Like, how do you see this wide receiver room shaking out? Who plays what? Who plays where? You know, how do you think they're going to be rotating these guys once training camp starts?
Wow, man, this is a wild this is a
Mhm.
wild group, right? I mean, you thought that you wanted to keep 7 last year, like look at the
Yeah.
group this year, right? So obviously I think Diggs, Davis, and Crowder will be the starting 3 when it comes to your X, Y, and your slot, right? Those I think those will
Mhm.
be the first guys out. I would imagine that it may be Kumaro, Stevenson, and Shakir as your next 3.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Kumaro, McKenzie, and Stevenson as your next 3, with Shakir having to earn his spot to kind of earn his way up the depth chart to be that like second team slot
Yeah.
guy. I would imagine they'll start with Stevenson and Kumaro on the outside and second team sets, with McKenzie being the second team slot guy, at least to start out with Shakir, Hodgins, and then whatever combination
Mhm.
of Gentry, Powell, and Williams you want to put at the end of the depth chart. Now, I say that in May, right? I say that in early May. I fully expect that Khalil Shakir will make a very good impression, and kind of work his way into more reps, maybe work his way into second team reps, and and figure out where that he's going to end up slotting in, right? It
Mhm.
could be, and I agree with this. He's pretty much a guarantee on the
Yeah.
53-man roster unless he gets injured.
GMs were
Um,
texting Brandon Beam, pissed he traded up. So
yep.
he's on a lot of teams' radars, even
And
though he slipped to the 5th round.
and Stevenson and Hodgins are 2 guys that stand out to me that have something to prove right this year.
Mhm.
Kumaro is a wild card for me. They love Kumaro for his
Special teams.
special teams ability, and he's one of the few guys that gives you an actual legitimate um, option on the boundary should it get to
Yep.
that point. And they don't really have a lot of guys like that, right? Because Shakir's going to probably be mainly a slot guy. McKenzie as a receiver, probably mainly a slot guy. Stevenson probably could be an outside guy. Hodgins, we don't know. Like played some slot, maybe some outside as well. Like, but he's got essentially no, he's got no NFL playing time, so he's got a lot to prove as well. So it is going to be very interesting to see how this is an interesting. I don't think Stevenson makes the team and Elam gets the number 5 jersey. That's
A
an
lot of
interesting
fans will
take
be
right there.
upset by that one right there.
Yeah, I
You'd see a
mean
lot of fans demanding their money back.
that this I think is a good question, my spin, right? Kumaro versus Stevenson. If the Bills only keep 6, will they give Stevenson that 6th spot? Um,
He ain't
when
playing
they
4
know,
phases of special teams.
right? That's the thing. Like, and if you're already talking about
Uh-oh.
maybe getting rid of Taiwan Jones, like
Uh,
Kumaro. I mean, Kumaro probably has an inside track to make the team at this point.
mhm.
I would have to say,
Yeah.
like, I
I mean,
mean,
I called my shot on Kumaro like 2nd week of training camp last year just because of that special teams ability.
yeah. And look, the Bills didn't keep 7 wide receivers last year, right? They only kept 6. So,
Mhm.
um, at least Chris can fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure they only kept 6 last year. So, if I recall, Stevenson started the year on IR, which allowed them to come into the season with 6. So, a lot of slot guys there. The
Mhm.
top 3 are set. Crowder, I love the comment that someone said Crowder being kind of underrated. Like Crowder
Yeah.
is like going to be very good this year. Like he is going to be a big part of this offense, I think. So man, what a list. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
And a lot of things, a lot of different packages and things that you can do with the wide receivers. I mean, if Jay Kumaro makes the team, there are also situations where you could put like Kumaro and Gabriel Davis out on the field, all those different things. But as long as the Buffalo Bills are out there in 11 personnel, this is sort of how I think it's going to shake out to start training camp. I think at the X receiver position, which is sort of like that alpha receiver, it's going to be Stephon Diggs with the first team. It's going to be Jake Kumaro with the second team. And then it's probably going to be Isaiah Hodgins with the third team. Then you look at the other boundary, the Z receiver, the flanker type. I think that's going to be Gabriel Davis, obviously, to start out. And then the second team, I think, will be Khalil Shakir. I think they're going to want him to have that inside outside flex, since Isaiah McKenzie's probably going to be manning the slot with the second team behind Crowder. So you have Shakir on the boundary with the second team, and then Marquez Stevenson with the third team. I don't think he plays in the slot in training camp. I think Marquez
Mm,
Stevenson sees a lot of his work on the boundary. I think he has to prove he can play on the boundary and be that take the top off threat, not just from the slot, but from the boundary. If he wants to carve out a role as the 7th receiver on this team, I think he's a niche receiver. I don't think you can keep him as your 6th guy because of his lack of special teams abilities unless he's the kick and punt returner. So if he's going to be your take the top off type of guy, Marquez Stevenson, he's probably not a guy who's going to be active every week. He's probably going to be your 7th wide receiver. He's going to be a matchup based guy. Then in the slot, you got Jamison Crowder, Isaiah McKenzie, and then with the 3rd team, Khalil Shakir will probably mix in because he's going to be a slot here long term. So you get him with the 2nd team on the boundary, you get him with the 3rd team in the slot to work him in behind Crowder and McKenzie. So then the slot, it's Crowder, McKenzie, Shakir. I think that's how the wide receivers are going to play out in training camp. I think those are the guys who have a legitimate shot at making this football team. Hodgins and Stevenson being the outside looking in, but yeah, it's gonna be a battle. It's gonna be fun to watch, and that's one of the reason why it's fun to have Matt Barkley here in the 4th quarter of preseason games, tossing them passes as opposed to some noodle-armed UDFA. By Chance comes in and says the Shakir hype is way too much. I like him and his long-term potential, but people are acting like he is a 2nd-round talent. He is at best wide receiver 4 in 2022. Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly where we all have him slotted. I don't think people are coming in here saying he's going to be anything more than that. But what we mentioned, I think the hype around him is he's a lock to make the roster.
Yep.
Like multiple GMs texted Brandon Beane after he picked Shakir, like, dang it, I'm mad you traded up. The Bills understand that if they try to expose Khalil Shakir to the practice squad, they're not getting him back. So I think that he's going to have a spot on this roster. And that's why I think the Bills in an ideal world would like him to win the kick and punt return battle. And we got Carl Thoman coming in saying, will Khalil Shakir be the kick punt returner? I think it's a 3-way battle between Isaiah McKenzie getting his chance at redemption, Marquez Stevenson getting a shot to make the roster, because I think they would love to keep his speed on the roster, and then Khalil Shakir. I personally hope Khalil Shakir wins this because I want him active on game days. I like his ability to play inside it out because we don't have a lot of boundary depth at wide receiver. What are your thoughts? Like, who do you think is going to win this kick punt return competition?
Well, it's exactly how you said, right? And that was one of the things I said at the top of the show, like, what are some of the training camp battles I'm most interested in? And it is this one, right? I mean, Khalil Shakir does have experience, mainly as a punt returner, right, in college, but he does have a little bit of kick return experience. Stevenson, the opposite, right? A lot of kick return experience in college, not a lot of punt return experience. He got a little bit last year.
No offense, anyone can return a kick.
Yeah.
In today's NFL, anyone can return a kick.
So your ball security, right, really comes into play really just on punts, right? I mean, you like ball security, obviously, after you catch the ball is important to anybody on the offense, but like fielding a punt, right? Not after you catch it and then like fielding a punt cleanly is hugely important. And yeah, and you might say Shakir could be the best one of the 3 starting out, and we'll see, right? Because like McKenzie's had his issues, Stevenson clearly had his issues last year, but I will say this: I'd like to see Shakir win the competition, but I don't want to discount. I don't want to completely discount Marquez Stevenson yet because I feel like I was really excited about the speed he brought to the table last year, but I also think that he took his lumps last year, right? He took some big hits. He took some big hits on some returns. He had some ball security issues, and it was tough for him coming off the injury, then getting thrown into the mix in the middle of the seat. Like a tough situation for him. And Isaiah McKenzie, maybe he's in the mix again, but like at this point, we kind of know what Isaiah McKenzie is as a kick and punt returner, right? Stevenson and Shakir are still the relatively unknowns there. And so I want it to be Shakir, and right now I'll predict it will be, just because like you said, he will be on the roster, and I think that he's gonna be impressive in camp in that regard. So I'll say Shakir.
Yeah, we got Doug Masters with a comment, but first I want to talk about Pave Dave's comment. He says Stevenson is not a return guy in the NFL. I'm sorry. I mean, he housed a punt in the preseason, so that does say something about his abilities. And I think the Bills are a lot more patient with him than I think fans want to be. Now they weren't patient. They weren't patient in regular season games because they're in a win now window. Like they're in a Super Bowl window. They're not patient in the regular season, but I think they also understand that the guy had 3 career punt returns in college. So I don't think they're willing to give up on him right away. They're going to definitely want to see what he has this offseason. Now, you could be right. He could have no business as an NFL returner, but I think the Buffalo Bills are going to be a heck of a lot more patient. But Douglas Masters comes in and says, does Shakir have any path to a role as a niche weapon out of the back? That's his future here. Like he is the heir apparent to Isaiah McKenzie, or maybe what we all wanted Isaiah McKenzie to be, a combination of Isaiah McKenzie and Cole Beasley. Like that's the role that he's projected, I think, by most people, that I think the Bills envision him sliding into, being the slot of the future and being a dynamic slot. Whether he can take on that role in 2022, that's another question. There are a number of people on social media who are like, hey, that Isaiah McKenzie contract is cuttable. I'm not there yet. I'm not willing to be that spicy or that hot with my takes. I'll believe it at training camp when I see him taking reps in front of Isaiah McKenzie, that Isaiah McKenzie being cut is a possibility. The Buffalo Bills PR team has spent all offseason joking that Isaiah McKenzie's the face of the franchise. They have these Bills embedded series following this guy all around town. I think really Isaiah McKenzie has ingrained himself in this locker room, and that's important. That is really, really, really important to the Buffalo Bills. So as much as some people want to look at the contract, say it's cuttable, football is football, etc., I'm not willing to go there yet on Isaiah McKenzie. Are you willing to go there yet?
No, not yet. But I do think that the heir apparent to Isaiah McKenzie and even Jamison Crowder is Khalil Shakir, or at least that's what we hope, right? He's been, scouted as an excellent route runner, right? That's one of his calling cards in college, was his ability as a route runner. And that's something that, although fans like to say, well, why didn't we just have Isaiah McKenzie replace Cole Beasley? Well, it's because he's not the route runner that Cole Beasley is. Like,
yeah,
Isaiah McKenzie isn't the route runner that a Jamison Crowder is, and maybe isn't even the route runner that a Khalil Shakir is or will become. McKenzie really is the gadget guy, right? And he can play a little bit out of the slot, but you're not really putting Isaiah McKenzie in as a receiver because of his route running prowess, right? You're putting him in because of his speed, his ability to do different things, your ability to put him into the backfield if you need to, jet sweeps, things like that. Like, so he does offer something that is unique to the offense. And like you said, him being so ingrained with the culture and with the team, like it's going to be really hard for me right now to see him getting cut.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe as well, but who knows? Like these things can change quickly, right? We get to training camp. We're 2 weeks into training camp. Isaiah McKenzie's taking snaps with the third team. All of a sudden, we're having a different conversation, right? So these things can take a quick turn once we get the pads on. Once we get to training camp, we start to maybe sort of have a clearer picture of what the Bills envision. This is, for now, everyone's favorite word in this podcast. This is all simply a prognostication. All right, transitioning now to the tight end room, which I think is getting really interesting for the Buffalo Bills, turning a weakness into a strength over the offseason. You got Dawson Knox, you got OJ Howard, you got Tommy Sweeney returning from the Dawson Knox and Tommy Sweeney are returning. OJ Howard added as a UFA. You got Quentin Morris returning from the practice squad, and you got Jalen Weidermeyer as the undrafted free agent tight end, but a guy who's got a lot of hype around his name because he was a highly touted college prospect before some really bad testing numbers this offseason dinged him all the way into undrafted free agent territory. Just to get things started off here, like, how do you envision the Buffalo Bills sort of incorporating tight ends in this 2022 offense? I think we all think the Bills are going to be using more tight ends this year.
Well, you don't go out and sign OJ Howard early in free agency. I know it was a fairly modest contract, but I don't think you go out and sign OJ Howard in free agency if you don't have a vision to utilize two tight ends, at least a little bit more than you did last year. We know at the end of the season last year, the Bills were only dressing one tight end at the end of the season, right? Dawson Knox was the only tight end, not counting Reggie Gilliam in that mix, obviously, as well. So I like the idea of the Bills potentially using multiple tight ends, tendency breakers, right? Like, or not giving away tendencies, as Kendall likes to say, like getting OJ Howard and Dawson Knox on the field at the same time. The 12 personnel thing is real, I think, to the extent that, look, it may be a situation where the Bills do less four wide receiver sets this year. If guys like, Crowder, Davis, and Diggs are doing their thing, and you don't really need to substitute like you did last year, maybe, where you had like kind of that fourth guy in Emmanuel Sanders to rotate in with, Gabe Davis and Beasley. Maybe Maybe Shakir isn't that guy. Like, I don't know, right? But in any case, him being a rookie maybe plays a factor in the Bills maybe going a little bit more balanced with 2 tight ends as opposed to the 4 wide receivers. So I like where this room is at right now. I like the addition of OJ Howard. I know a lot of people were kind of clamoring for that during the free agency period. And I do think top to bottom, this is the best tight end depth and room that
Mhm.
the Bills have had since Sean McDermott has been the head coach of this version of the Bills. Like, this is the deepest tight end room we've had. Might be the deepest tight end room we've had even going all the way through the drought.
Mhm.
And it's exciting, the possibilities, because tight end's been kind of a wasteland for this team for years, and now it's kind of looking like it's turning back the other way. Jalen Weidermeyer was a guy who was a top 60 prospect on TDN's board, top 60 overall prospect on TDN's board, their TE2 before his testing. So Bills potentially have a steal there. Tommy Sweeney, been with the team for a while.
Mhm.
Not sure what the future looks like for him. And Quentin Morris is a guy who's kind of um, stuck around as that practice squad UDFA guy as well from last year. So a really nice room now for the Bills. Dawson Knox on the way to elite status as a tight end. OJ Howard looking to refurbish his, his image across the league with that 1 year deal. And I think OJ Howard taking the Mitch Trubisky route, coming here for 1 year, trying to rehabilitate his image, getting integrated in an offense that's going to use him is great. And honestly, for him, he's used to being in a room that has a bunch of tight ends in it, right? He was in a room with Cameron Brate and Rob
Mhm.
Gronkowski. So not unfamiliar territory for a guy like OJ Howard either. So him not having to be relied on as the top guy, I think is going to be a big plus for his psyche. So I love the room, man. I
Yeah.
actually really love this room.
I mean, looking to incorporate a tight end, this season, I think number one is you're going to see more 12 personnel from the Buffalo Bills. But as you mentioned and Kendall mentioned, you can hide tendencies because these guys can be split out like wide receivers. Dawson Knox, OJ Howard can each be split out as wide receivers. I think you could see a whole bunch of stuff this year where we're bunching, we're heavy on one side, and you can sort of leave a wide receiver ISO'd on the other side. You got Knox and Howard and maybe like Gabriel Davis on one side of the field. That could leave a guy like Stephon Diggs with some one-on-one matchups, and the safety can't get over the top of a guy like Stephon Diggs the way they want to because of all those big bodies on the other side of the football field. And then, of course, play action, right? The passing game, the deep shots. What do we want? We want those deep shots in this offense. And, having those 2 tight ends, you don't know if they're going to stay into block. You don't know if they're going to be receivers. They're playing mind games with people at the line of scrimmage. You can do some play action stuff. You can get some safeties creeping up, and you can go over the top of the defense to receivers like Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis. So really excited about the implementation of tight ends and incorporating Howard and Knox together into the offense in 2020. And as for, tight end 3, that's going to be super interesting as well. You got
Mhm.
Jalen Weidermeyer, who's got sort of that pre-draft pedigree, SIS, 6'5", 250. They note he's got size, catch radius, mismatch potential. He's not embarrassing as a blocker, and he's not a plus athlete. It's why he was a UDFA. But then you got Tommy Sweeney, who is clearly a coach and locker room favorite. I posted
Mhm.
about the TE3 competition on Twitter the other day. Former Buffalo Bill Keith Tobridge chimed in, and he said, and I quote, Tommy was handpicked and drafted. Great locker room guy, knows the offense like the back of his hand. But at some point, and I told Keith this straight up, I was like Keith, like, listen, at some point, when is that not enough? Production at some point is going to matter. And as much as of a locker room guy as Tommy Sweeney is, as much as he knows the playbook, if he's dropping key balls like he did last season, if he's getting benched for offensive linemen like he was at the end of last season, that's not going to be enough to usurp a guy like Jalen Weidermeyer. And at the end of the day, the Buffalo Bills might want to keep a 7th receiver and are comfortable with Reggie Gilliam as TE3, and they don't carry a traditional third tight end at all. Or maybe even Quentin Morris steps up and ends that role. I doubt it. I think that's a far off chance, but
Mhm.
there's a bunch of different ways this tight end battle can shake out.
And I think it depends on sort of what the Bills envision for the tight end, like usage in this offense on kind of
Mhm.
how this might shake out, right? I think that I really liked what you said about at what point do the scales tip away from just being like a locker room guy to production mattering or even potential mattering more. When you're a great locker room guy and you have at least modest production, you stick around. When you're a great locker room guy and you don't have really any production, it's tough, right, to keep guys like that around, and it's a tough decision to let them go, right? I mean, it is a tough decision to let him go because you feel invested. You've had this guy on your team for a couple of years. You've seen him battle through his, some of the toughest moments of his life and coming back from the blood clot situation. Um, and I apologize if I'm misspeaking on what exactly that ailment was, but I believe it was a blood clot situation for Tommy Sweeney, and he's battled all the way back
Myocarditis.
myocarditis. So thank you. Um, and so he's been through a lot, but you can't make a decision like this based on emotion at the end of the day, right? I mean, it
Mhm.
has to be a football decision. You can use emotion to an extent when it's a guy that has production for you, right? And has actually like contributed some to the team. And that's what makes this really hard because I love Tommy Sweeney as a person. I think he's a great guy for the locker room. I think he's great for the culture of the team. But I think the Bills are at the point now where it shouldn't matter like what guy you are on the roster, whether you're the first or the 90th guy, right now. Like you need to be a culture fit and you need to be good for the locker room either way.
Mhm.
And this is a great one. Like they probably tried to bring Harrison Phillips back and they just couldn't, right? And that was a little bit different because he was a free
Yeah.
agent, but
But his locker room situation didn't matter. The Bills set a price and they said, we're not going to go above it.
right.
And when Minnesota went above it, they're like, listen, we love you. You are our, like Ed Block Courage guy. You're our Walter, or not Ed Block Courage, but our Walter Payton Man of the Year. But it wasn't enough for the Buffalo Bills to pay more than they thought he was worth.
Yep. So that is a good perspective in when it comes
Mhm.
to trying to maybe make a decision on whether Tommy Sweeney sticks on the roster versus maybe a guy like Jalen Weidermeyer
Mhm.
who film looks pretty decent, probably better than Tommy Sweeney's did in college, and his testing really pushed him down draft boards. So really going to be interesting to see. And Carl makes a good point. When your roster is this good, you cut good people, and you may be cutting good people as you say, like good actual good people as a person, right? And not to mention like good football players, right? So it's tough. Every guy 1 through 90 right now, and I know we only have 85, I think, right now, but every guy one
Yeah.
through 90 when it goes to the summer, like they all need to be culture fits, right? I
Mhm.
mean, that should go without saying. So,
Except Bobby Hart.
oh, except Bobby
Still
Hart,
don't
yeah.
get it. I still don't get it. Anyway, speaking of Bobby Hart, on to the offensive tackle room. So offensive tackle, the Buffalo Bills, thanks to our guy, Uber Hansen Hansel on Twitter for sort of pointing out the Buffalo Bills changed some of their offensive line designations over the course of the weekend or of the week on buffalobills.com. Uh, David Questenberry is now listed as a tackle first. Cody Ford is listed as a guard/tackle, guard first, and Greg Manns is listed as a guard/center. So maybe the Buffalo Bills are sort of tipping their hands as to what each of these guys' roles are going to be on this football team. But for now, in the offensive tackle room, I put all the guys that I could see possibly taking snaps at offensive tackle. Maybe a guy like Alec Anderson or Derek Kerstetter fall into this range as well. Tanner Owen, maybe one of those guys who we think is going to be a guard fits into the offensive tackle room at some point on like the third team or the fourth team. But for now, these are like the solid offensive tackle options for the Buffalo Bills in the room. Deion Dawkins, Spencer Brown are your two starters. Then you have Tommy Doyle, last year's 5th-round pick, David Questenberry, Cody Ford, Luke Tenuta, and Bobby Hart. Aaron Kromer is the new offensive line coach. And with a new offensive line coach comes a new philosophy. I think a lot of people want, a lot of people on social media, I'm hearing people say things like, hey, pick one spot for Cody Ford. Let him master that spot. Pick one spot for Tommy Doyle. Let him master that spot. I don't think you're going to see that from the Buffalo Bills this training camp. Eric Turner here at Cover One has told us on multiple occasions in the Cover One group chat, like, listen, Aaron Kromer
Guard
is,
tackle, he's
yeah,
listed as Bills Mafia.
he's
So,
listed as a guard tackle now. He's mentioned Kromer's philosophy is everyone knowing all of the positions. And oftentimes you see Aaron Kromer teams shuffle guys all over the offensive line early on in training camp. He wants them purposely playing out of position. And the reason why he does that is because he wants everyone to know and understand the responsibilities of every single position. When you're playing right tackle, I want you to also know what the right guard is feeling and experiencing, because you know if the right guard does this and that's the wrong thing and you see that out of the corner of your eye, you can adjust what you're doing properly. So I think you're going to see a lot of shuffling along the offensive line early, but how do you see the depth of this offensive tackle position shaking out?
So Bills kept 4 last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I see. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take the banner down if I
No, you're
did.
good.
Um, so obviously Dawkins and Brown are kind of locked in, right? And then you like to think that Tommy Doyle, given that he was a 5th round pick last year, and given that he really is a pure tackle, is likely in the mix here too. At this point, right? If you're going to try to get the most you can out of Cody Ford with Aaron Kromer now as the offensive line coach, is it possible that most you can get out of him is now back to right tackle? Like, I don't know, right? It's very
Mhm.
interesting, but I do think that 4th tackle spot is kind of like maybe up for grabs, right? I think it could be Quessenberry if they want to keep
Yeah.
a veteran in the mix, right? Because Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle are really still very young
Mhm.
players. Do you want Deion Dawkins really to be the only veteran there? And then if worse comes to worse, is Cody Ford your 4th? Like, I don't know that the Bills want that,
Yeah.
right? So for me, I would see this kind of shaking out as obviously Dawkins and Brown are your starters. I would imagine that it's going to be some combination of Tommy Doyle getting second team reps at either right tackle or left tackle, and the same for Quessenberry at left tackle or right tackle. I don't know. I can't tell you right now, like, who is it going to be that's the second team left tackle in camp? Like, right
Mhm.
now, my gut is telling me it's going to be Quessenberry, and my gut is telling me the
Yeah.
right tackle backup in camp is going to be Tommy Doyle. But I could also see the Bills giving Tommy Doyle left tackle reps.
Yeah, I would flip that. If I had to bet some money on who the first offensive tackle was going to be, left tackle was going to be on the second team, I would assume it was probably going to be Tommy Doyle, because that's
Yeah,
I think that's where he
that's
played
that.
mostly in
Yeah,
camp
you're
last
probably
year. So,
right. Actually, you're probably right on that.
but
Yep.
but at the end of the day, right now, as of May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, 2022, I look at David Quessenberry as the backup left tackle, left guard, right guard, and right tackle. Like, if any of our starters went down and there was a game tomorrow, if Spencer Brown went down, I'd want David Quessenberry at right tackle. If Ryan Bates went down, I'd want David Quessenberry at right guard. If Roger Saffold went down, I'd want David Quessenberry at left guard. If Deion Dawkins went down, I'd want David Quessenberry at left tackle. Like, he is the number one, that veteran in the room, that presence that I feel comfortable with coming off the bench and spot starting. He's the only one right now. And obviously, if somebody else, like if Mitch Morse goes down, Bates kicks into center, and Quessenberry then fills into Ryan Bates' spot. So to me, I see Quessenberry as like the sort of that 4-position versatile right now. I think Bates is honestly going to be the number 2, the backup center. I think Doyle and Tenuta are battling for sort of like that promising possible future starter, offensive tackle 4 type of role. And Bobby Hart is just going to be in training camp to build up the confidence of the edge rushers.
Yeah, I was just looking at Questenberry. I know that this is something that's been posted a lot
Mhm.
already, but all of his snaps last year were at right tackle.
Yeah.
In 2021,
2020 2020, he took
2020,
some snaps at left tackle.
yep, 2020. Actually, all of his snaps 421 at left tackle. So he does
Mhm.
have experience in both. But I think you're right. Swing tackle, as Claude says, it's a nice thing to have. But I think Tommy Doyle maybe had visions of being a swing tackle as well. So really going to be interesting. I think Doyle and Quesenberry both have swing tackle potential, but I also think that neither are a settling option for me right now. Like, if I had
Mhm.
to like Quesenberry would be a more settling option for me if I had
Yeah.
to put him in, but like I don't feel great about the depth at tackle on this roster right
Mhm.
now between you and me. I don't.
Yeah, Douglas Masters comes in and says, "So is Quessenberry the 6th man, or is Doyle in heavy sets?" Right now, I would say it's probably Quessenberry, I think, but also you could see the Bills go away from that this year and just play, more with their tight ends, guys like Dawson Knox, OJ Howard, Tommy Sweeney, Jalen Weidemeyer, etc. Some free agents out on the market. Darrell Williams is still available. That's a name that the Buffalo Bills maybe they consider, or I'm sure they have considered him. I think it would be the question is, does he consider the Buffalo Bills? Nobody has really looked to sign Darrell Williams yet in free agency. Kendall Lamb is available. Mike Reamer is a guy who's got, some experience, the Carolina connections there. He's been with Kansas City a long time, sort of like a David Questenberry type of guy who's played all along the offensive line in his career. Ty Nsekhe is still sitting out there, and Tyrell Crosby, a guy that I really liked. He's been suffering from some injuries the last couple of years. It's probably what's keeping him off an NFL roster at this point, the former Detroit Lions. So there are some options available in free agency as well. So let's slide into the interior and let's talk about the interior offensive line room. Obviously, you have Mitch Morse, Roger Saffold, Ryan Bates as the guys who are going to be starting. On the Buffalo Bills website, they listed David Questenberry as tackle guard, so he's probably tackle first, but you could see some Questenberry at guard. Cody Ford was listed at guard tackle, so you could see Cody Ford take some time at tackle, but he'll probably play mostly guard. Then you have Greg Manx, who is a center guard, Ike Budker, who's a guard, who I don't think we see at all in training camp. I think he's going to get PUP'd and be available mid-season. Jacob Capra, who I couldn't tell you a thing about that man. Alec Anderson, Derek Kirkstead. Is there any Buffalo Bill we pay attention to less than Jacob Capra? Can you name what college Jacob Capra went to?
No.
I can name every Buffalo Bills college except for Jacob Capra. Everyone on the roster, I can name you what college or university they went to. I can tell you their height. I can tell you their weight. I can't for Jacob Capra. And then you have the UDFAs who Alec Anderson, UCLA, Tanner Owen, Northwest Missouri State, Derek Kerstetter, Texas. Those are the guys who sort of round out the room here for the Buffalo Bills on the interior offensive line. So again, same question. How does the depth shake out? Like that's the biggest concern right now for the Buffalo Bills.
Well, I think the Bills, I think one for a roster spot anyway, they need to figure out, is the backup center going to be, is it going to be Bates or is it going to be someone else? Right. Like I would imagine that given that Bates is going to be a starter based on what they're paying him, I would imagine that they probably want someone else to be the backup center so that they can avoid having to shuffle so much. But that's a big question for me. Is let's say something happens to Mitch Morse, right? Does Ryan Bates slide over to center and then do you bring Cody Ford in to right guard, or do you leave Ryan Bates at guard and bring in someone else? Do you bring in someone else at center? In this case, your only option really is going to be Greg Mance, right? So I personally would probably slide Bates over to center and probably take my chances on whatever guard they have, fill in a right guard, but that's moving two players. So I can see both sides of the argument there. So the depth here is going to be very interesting. I think that I'd like to see Cody Ford. We talked about Cody Ford at tackle in the last kind of portion. I'd like to see with Cromer. I'd like to see what they can get out of Cody Ford at guard. That's where I want to see him in camp. That's where I want to see him take reps. I want to see him probably take reps as the second team right guard, maybe even as a second team left guard. Like I want to see where he's best with Aaron Cromer coaching him.
And my biggest thing with Cody Ford right now is, like, even if we do get the best out of him, like somebody gets hurt and he goes in there and he doesn't embarrass himself, like his contract's up. Are you really going to give him a second contract?
No, you're not going to give him a second contract.
Is he really going to slide into the Roger Saffold role in 2023? Like, I just don't envision any of that for Cody Ford, which makes it so difficult, which makes it really like, I wish they would have cut bait with Cody Ford, moved on to a younger player, found another guy to develop, a guy who's got a future here. Cause I just don't see a future in Buffalo for Cody Ford. I mean, maybe somebody gets hurt, he goes in, he's serviceable, he signs like a 1-year deal, comes back, proves it again, then gets a longer term contract. But that's my biggest peeve with Cody Ford right now. It's not even that he's still on the team. It's that, like, I just don't see a future with him anywhere. So I just feel like we're biding our time. We're trying to see if we can turn him into a solid backup. Like,
exactly. And I think this is why a lot of fans were surprised and maybe a little upset that the Bills really didn't address interior offensive line more in the draft, right? Because you are very much unsettled beyond this year. As much as you'd like to say, like, okay, well, we got Rick Bates back and okay, Roger Saffold's here. What about in 2023, right? Like Roger Saffold's probably not back. Ford's going to be gone. Yeah, of course he likes Ford. He traded up for him, and he
Yeah.
doesn't want to cut bait with him because
He
he wants to
seems
see what he can still
he
get out of him.
seems snake bitten over Wyatt Teller. And like I understand that you traded the wrong guy, right? Like you let go of a guy who's, now a very, very good football player, but just because you have one regret doesn't mean you should have two. Like,
Yeah.
uh
Which is, and again, I still would have liked to see them address offensive line a little bit earlier in the draft, but they didn't. So, okay, for 2022, the starters look okay, but man, again, like we saw last year, if guys go down, this could unravel quickly
mhm.
on the interior once again.
And Chris Jenke comes in and says, in his opinion, Ford is a placeholder as the ninth offensive lineman until Bucker returns. I don't think he is a placeholder. I don't think he's a ninth offensive lineman. I think the ninth offensive lineman is like Tommy Doyle right now. I really do think that, and then Greg Manx, like as the center guard, I think he's like the eighth and ninth guy. I look at it, and I mentioned earlier, I think I would feel most comfortable with Quessenberry as sort of a 4-position backup: left tackle, left guard, right tackle. But I also see a situation where you look at the backup position. Maybe we get to training camp. I could see a situation where Quessenberry is left tackle, left guard, switching, rotating second team left tackle, third team left guard, getting comfortable on the left side. And then Cody Ford is second team right guard, third team right tackle, getting comfortable on the right side. So you sort of have left side Quessenberry, right side Ford as your main backup. Then you have Ryan Bates swapping into center if there's an injury to Mitch Morse, and Greg Manx in there in case of emergency, just having a third guy who is capable of snapping a football. And then Tommy Doyle is just like the last developmental guy. I can legitimately see an offensive line, and that's the way it's built up.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, actually. Like having guy like, and you mentioned how Cromer likes to have guys know
Mhm.
multiple positions, and even if it's not all the positions, if you know an entire side, right?
Yeah.
Like then that still kind of fits the mold of what he. Yeah, guard is a problem. It is
And
still
who
very.
knows? Maybe we get to training camp and some of these like young dude, like Aaron Cromer has polished some turds in his career. Like John Miller, some of those guys in LA who were
Tanner
later
Owen
round
intrigues me.
picks.
I will say that Tanner Owen does intrigue me.
Alec Anderson and Derek Kerstetter intrigue me. I think I think all of these guys are a year away from seriously competing for a roster spot, but I can see a Ryan Bates path to someday eventually being something of use to this football team with
Mhm.
Alec Anderson, Derek Kerstetter, or Tanner Owen, with Aaron Cromer and his ability to, like I said, polish those turds with some of the versatility that these guys provide. The fact that they're going to get into an NFL weight room, a lot of these guys were playing around 300 pounds in college. Okay, maybe 2 years from now, you'll be 330 pounds, just like Ryan Bates, and you'll maintain that athleticism because our strength and conditioning staff did right by you. Maybe some of these guys will have a legitimate chance, but on paper, height, weight, speed guy is right. Like after the starters, guard is a problem for the Buffalo Bills on paper. I look at some of the free agents who are available. Trey Hopkins, who's got center guard flex. Max Garcia, who's got center guard flex, but you don't want him playing center. He had a bunch of bad snaps to Kyler Murray over his head, but then again, those would probably be right in Josh Allen's chest last season with the Arizona Cardinals.
That's why you put him on the list, was just to make that comment.
I didn't think of it till just now, I swear. Michael Schofield, formerly the LA Chargers, he's always been a favorite of ours. He's got guard tackle flex. I sort of left off some other guys off the list: JC Treader, Eric Flowers. I think they're going to be looking for starting spots, but there are some quality offensive linemen still on the board. And, Chris Jenke makes a great point. Week 6 or week 7, if Ike Bucker comes back, all of a sudden it's not so much of a problem because Ike
It's
Bucker
still a
is not going
problem
to
though.
embarrass
Like
him.
let's admit, like it's still not
Torn
great.
Achilles is a tough injury to come back from. It's tough. It's not an ACL, it's an Achilles. It's different, and it's tough to come back from. So yeah, it'll be super interesting. All right. Hour 30 on the dot. I think we did a pretty solid job tonight, Claude. We're all annoyed that we didn't take Donovan West to join the
Yes.
club here,
We
man.
were big Donovan West fans on this show, so
This was
yes.
the Donovan West hour for a good amount of the pre-draft process. But yeah, it's gonna be super interesting. Who knows? This could be a situation where we get to the regular season and Eric Cromer is just he's that guy, man. And this offensive line is firing all cylinders, and They're playing with good technique and they're, playing to the best of their abilities, and he helps all these guys find their ceilings. Who knows? A guy like Spencer Brown takes the next step with his athletic profile. We have those two bookends at tackles. They can maybe clean up a lot of the mistakes from the interior. So it'll be really interesting to see how it all shakes out. But that's going to do it for us this evening. The draft is over, so it's time for us to stop having 2-hour shows. I think it's
only an hour and a half this time.
It's time to retire the 2-hour extravaganzas. We'll probably be bringing those back right around time when the training camp starts. So we're at the hour and a half here. We're gonna call it a close. If you haven't noticed, the bottom ticker of the show sort of been previewing all the shows that we have here coming up on the air raid hour. We are prepared. We have all of our shows mapped out through the month of June. Next week, we're breaking down the defense schedule release the week after that. And then it's time to start previewing our opponents. We're going to talk about the AFC East. We're going to talk about the NFC North. We're playing the NFC North this year. We're going to talk about the AFC North. We're playing the AFC North this year. Some of the primetime matchups, and I don't mean primetime in terms of primetime games. Some of these might be primetime games, but are non sort of preset divisions. We got to play Tennessee. We got to go at Kansas City. We got to go at the Rams. So we're going to break all those teams down, and then we're going to set our expectations, and then we're going to have some fun in June, maybe do some snake drafts and some fun type of things like that before we get to training camp at the end of July. And again, a quick program note, once June hits, we're going back to once a week. So we'll be just Mondays at 9 p.m. We won't be Mondays and Thursdays. So we've talked about a lot here, and we will continue to talk about a lot, but 2 shows a week is a lot when you get into the month of June and you are so far away and so far removed from football. So we will be back to Mondays only starting June 1. And, and then we'll be back to the pregame and day after once the regular season starts. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
I should also probably remind people that if they're listening in audio form to, subscribe and to leave us a nice little review. And if you are listening to this on demand or watching this on demand, to leave a comment in the comment section. And we will make sure that we reply to you, and smash that like on your way out, and share. Let a friend know if you think they would enjoy the show. I forgot my little spiel there at the end. So for real this time, Dave, until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Are we having fun yet?